changes men is a great valley. Lakes and streams everywhere.
The Big Trail didn't just push boundaries, it shattered them. This wasn't a movie, it was a 70mm gamble that cost a fortune, destroyed careers, and nearly killed its cast. A first-time leading man who couldn't act. A format so new that theaters couldn't show it. And a director who thought filming a real wagon crossing a real cliff was a perfectly reasonable idea. These are 20 weird facts about The Big Trail, and the bonus? The studio knew it was doomed before it even premiered. Saddle up. This frontier gets rough fast. Number 1. John Wayne wasn't supposed to be in movies at all. His real name was Marion Morrison, a college football player at USC with zero acting experience and a future in law. He worked as a prop guy on Fox studio lots, hauling furniture, moving scenery, just trying to make rent. Director Raoul Walsh spotted him one day carrying a massive table across the lot. He didn't see a prop man, he saw a cowboy. Walsh asked him to read for The Big Trail, and Morrison had no idea what he was doing. He stumbled through the lines, couldn't hit his marks, spoke too quietly, and looked terrified. But Walsh didn't care about polish. He wanted raw, he wanted real, and he saw something in this kid that no one else did. So he took a nobody and made him the lead in the most expensive Western ever made. Marion Morrison became John Wayne. Not because he earned it, because Raoul Walsh bet everything on a hunch. And for the next 2 years, that hunch looked like the worst decision in Hollywood history. Wayne couldn't carry the film, critics destroyed him, and his career died before it even started. But Walsh never apologized. He knew what he saw. And 70 years later, so did the world.
But it's a long, tough pull from here. 25.
Number 2. The Big Trail wasn't filmed in one format. It was filmed in two. Raoul Walsh and Fox Studios wanted to revolutionize cinema with a new widescreen process called Grandeur, a massive 70mm format that made every frame look epic. But there was a problem. Almost no theaters in America could project it. So instead of abandoning the experiment, they doubled down. They filmed the entire movie twice. Every scene, every shot, every take. Once in 70mm grandeur for the handful of theaters that could show it, and once again in standard 35mm for everyone else. 2 cameras, 2 crews, 2 complete productions running side by side. Actors had to perform each scene multiple times, hitting marks for both setups. The logistics were a nightmare, scheduling became chaos, and the budget, already massive, exploded beyond control. But Walsh refused to compromise. He believed widescreen was the future, and he was willing to shoot the same movie twice to prove it. The 70mm version was stunning, breathtaking, a visual experience unlike anything audiences had ever seen. But only a few thousand people ever got to watch it. The rest saw the standard version, and they didn't understand what the fuss was about. The Big Trail was ahead of its time in the worst possible way. It proved widescreen could work, but it also proved that being right doesn't matter if no one can see it.
Sure. West of Oregon comes the ocean.
Number 3. Fox didn't just want an American film, they wanted a global one. So while Walsh was directing the English version, Fox hired additional directors and cast members to film the entire movie again in 3 more languages: French, German, and Spanish. Same locations, same sets, same costumes, but with completely different actors delivering the dialogue in their native tongues. It wasn't dubbing, it wasn't subtitles. It was 4 separate productions filmed simultaneously in the wilderness. The logistical madness was unprecedented. French actors would shoot a scene in the morning. German actors would reset and shoot it again in the afternoon. Spanish actors took the evening shift, and the English cast filled in the gaps. Translators scrambled to adapt the dialogue. Directors argued over timing and tone. And the crew, already exhausted from managing 2 film formats, now had to manage 4 separate movies. Some actors never even met their counterparts. They'd pass each other on trails, dressed in identical costumes, heading toward the same covered wagon to film the same death scene in 4 different languages. It was ambitious, it was insane, and it was expensive. By the time production wrapped, Fox had spent a fortune on a film most audiences would never see in the format it was designed for, spoken in languages they didn't understand. The Big Trail wasn't just a movie, it was 4 movies. and all of them flopped.
Reduce Cyrus to a second Missouri anywhere out yonder.
Number 4. The studio didn't film on a backlot. They went to the real frontier. Raoul Walsh insisted the movie needed authenticity, so the entire cast and crew traveled over 2,000 miles across the American West, filming in locations that hadn't changed since the 1800s. They set up camp in Wyoming, Montana, and Nevada, living in tents, cooking over open fires, sleeping under the stars. There were no trailers, no catering, no safety nets. If someone got hurt, the nearest hospital was hours away by horse. If it rained, filming stopped. If it snowed, they waited. And if an actor couldn't handle the elements, too bad. This wasn't Hollywood. This was survival. Walsh pushed the crew to the edge. He demanded real wagon trains crossing real rivers, real cliffs with real drops, real weather, real mud, real danger. Some crew members quit. Others got sick. A few were injured, but Walsh never slowed down. He believed the only way to capture the spirit of the pioneers was to live like them, suffer like them, risk everything like them. And he was right. The film looks real because it was real. Every river crossing, every mountain pass, every windswept prairie, it's all genuine. No sets, no studio tricks, no Hollywood magic, just raw landscape and human endurance. The Big Trail was shot the way Westerns used to be lived, and it nearly killed everyone involved. Number 5. Marguerite Churchill was cast as the female lead, a strong-willed pioneer, woman traveling west in search of a new life. She was beautiful, talented, and completely unprepared for what Raoul Walsh had planned. The role required her to ride horses, cross rivers, camp in the wilderness, and film in freezing temperatures for months. Churchill had never been camping in her life. She hated the outdoors, she hated the cold, and she especially hated the horses. But Walsh didn't care. He told her to toughen up or leave. So she stayed. And she suffered. Her hands froze during night shoots, her boots filled with mud during river crossings. She was thrown from a horse twice, once breaking a rib but hiding it from the crew because she didn't want to be replaced. The other actresses filming the foreign language versions had it just as bad. They shared stories around campfires, swapped remedies for saddle sores, and bonded over their collective misery. None of them had signed up for an endurance test. They thought they were making a movie. Instead, they were surviving one. Churchill later admitted she cried almost every night, freezing in her tent, wondering why she'd ever agreed to this nightmare. But when the cameras rolled, she never showed it. She delivered her lines with strength, grace, and determination. Because if John Wayne could fake being a cowboy, she could fake loving the frontier. And somehow, through sheer willpower, she made it look effortless. Number 6. The Native American actors in The Big Trail weren't actors at all. They were real members of several tribes hired to play themselves in scenes depicting interactions with the wagon train. Raoul Walsh wanted authenticity, so he negotiated with tribal leaders to bring entire families on location. Men, women, children, elders, all living in traditional clothing, performing traditional dances, speaking their native languages on camera. It was unprecedented. Most Westerns at the time cast white actors in brown makeup. Walsh refused to do that. He wanted the real thing, but respect and authenticity didn't mean safety. During one scene, a group of native performers were asked to ride at full speed toward the wagon train, firing prop rifles and arrows. The choreography was chaotic. Horses collided, riders fell. One man was trampled and suffered a broken arm. The production didn't stop. They just moved him off camera and kept shooting. There was no stunt coordinator, no insurance, no union protections, just Walsh yelling directions and everyone doing what they were told. Some of the native actors were paid fairly. Others were paid almost nothing. And when filming wrapped, they went home with stories, injuries, and very little credit. Decades later, film historians would praise The Big Trail for its authentic representation. But the people who made that authenticity possible were barely acknowledged. They weren't in the press materials. They weren't invited to the premiere. They were just there, risking everything and then forgotten. That's the part the weird facts don't usually mention, but it happened, and it mattered.
Ranges, men, is a great valley. Lakes and streams.
Number 7. The river crossing scene almost killed the cast. Raoul Walsh wanted to film a massive sequence where the entire wagon train forded a raging river. No miniatures, no studio tanks, just a real river with real current and real danger. The crew found a location in Montana where the water was deep, fast, and freezing cold. Walsh ordered the wagons in. The drivers hesitated. The water looked too rough, the current too strong, but Walsh didn't care. He wanted the shot. So they went. The first wagon made it across, barely. The second one started to tip. Water poured inside. The driver panicked, yanking the reins, and the horses reared. For a moment, it looked like the whole wagon would flip. Cast members on shore screamed. Crew members ran toward the water, and Walsh kept filming. He didn't yell cut. He didn't stop the cameras. He just watched. The driver regained control at the last second, and the wagon lurched forward, slamming into the opposite bank. Everyone was soaked. Everyone was furious. And Walsh called it perfect. He made them do it again, and again, each take more dangerous than the last. By the end of the day, 3 wagons had nearly capsized, 2 actors had been thrown into the water, and 1 horse had to be rescued downstream. But Walsh got his shot. The scene is stunning, terrifying, and completely real. You can see the fear on the actors' faces because it wasn't acting. They were genuinely afraid for their lives, and Walsh knew it. That's what made it work. Number 8. John Wayne couldn't ride a horse, at least not well. He'd grown up in California, played football, worked studio lots, but actual horsemanship, not even close. And now he was the lead in an epic western that required him to spend months in the saddle. The first day of filming, he climbed onto his horse and immediately looked awkward. His posture was wrong, his grip too tight. He bounced with every step instead of moving with the horse. Raoul Walsh watched and realized they had a problem. But there was no time for lessons. They were already shooting, so Walsh hired a wrangler to give Wayne a crash course every night after filming. They'd ride in the dark, practicing stops, turns, gallops, jumps. Wayne's legs ached, his back screamed. He fell off more than once, but he kept at it. Slowly, painfully, he started to improve. Not enough to fool real cowboys, but enough to look convincing on camera. By the end of production, Wayne could ride well enough to sell the illusion. He wasn't a natural, he wasn't graceful, but he looked like a man who belonged in the saddle, and that was enough. Years later, after Wayne became a legend, interviewers would ask him about his riding skills. He'd smile and lie, saying he'd been riding since childhood. But the truth was messier. The Duke learned to ride the same way he learned to act, by faking it until it looked real, and somehow, through sheer stubbornness, he pulled it off. Number 9. The cliff scene was never supposed to happen. The script called for the wagon train to descend a steep hill, but when Raoul Walsh scouted the location, he found something better, a near vertical drop, rocky, treacherous, and absolutely insane. He looked at his assistant director and said, "We're doing that." The crew thought he was joking. You couldn't take wagons down a cliff like that. It was suicide. The wheels would shatter, the wagons would tumble, people would die. But Walsh wasn't joking. He ordered the stunt team to rig ropes and pulleys, attach them to the wagons, and lower them down inch by inch. The first wagon descended slowly, wheels scraping rock, wood creaking under the strain. Halfway down, one of the ropes snapped. The wagon lurched sideways, slamming into the cliff face. The driver inside was thrown against the side, bruised but alive. They pulled him out, re-rigged the ropes, and kept going. The second wagon made it, the third one almost didn't. A wheel caught on a boulder, and for a moment, the entire wagon hung in the air, suspended by a single rope. Crew members held their breath. The rope held, and they lowered it the rest of the way. When they finished, Walsh had his shot, one of the most harrowing sequences ever filmed. Real wagons descending a real cliff with real people inside. No CGI, no safety nets, no second chances. Just human beings risking everything for a movie most of them would never see. That's not filmmaking, that's madness, and Walsh called it art. Number 10. By the time The Big Trail wrapped, Fox Studios had spent over $2 million, a staggering amount in 1930. Adjusted for inflation, that's nearly $40 million today. It was one of the most expensive films ever made at the time. and the studio was betting everything on its success. But behind the scenes, executives were panicking. Test screenings were mixed. The 70mm version looked incredible, but barely any theaters could show it. The 35mm version looked flat and unimpressive compared to the spectacle Walsh had promised. And John Wayne, the unknown lead, wasn't connecting with audiences. Women didn't find him charming. Men didn't find him heroic. Critics called him stiff, wooden, unconvincing. Fox tried to salvage the film with a massive marketing campaign. They plastered posters across the country, ran ads in every major newspaper, and booked the film in as many theaters as possible. But it didn't matter. When The Big Trail premiered in October 1930, audiences stayed home. The Great Depression had just begun, and people weren't spending money on movies, especially not expensive ones about pioneers. The film bombed. Theaters pulled it after a week. Fox lost nearly everything they'd invested, and John Wayne's career was over before it started. He wouldn't get another leading role for almost a decade. The Big Trail was a technical marvel, a logistical triumph, and a financial disaster. It proved that vision alone isn't enough. You also need timing, and in 1930, the timing couldn't have been worse. Number 11. The snow scene wasn't planned, it was survival. The production was filming in the mountains when an early winter storm hit without warning. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Winds howled at 40 miles per hour. Snow buried the wagons overnight. Most directors would have called it off, waited for better weather, maybe filmed around it. Not Raoul Walsh. He saw the storm and decided to shoot in it. He ordered the camera set up, told the actors to bundle up, and started filming. The cast was miserable. They wore period-accurate clothing, thin cotton and wool that did almost nothing against the cold. Their fingers went numb, their faces turned red. Between takes, they huddled around fires, shaking, trying to warm up. Walsh pushed them through take after take, capturing the raw brutality of frontier life in a way no set could replicate. You can see it on screen. The actors aren't pretending to be cold. They're genuinely freezing. Their breath visible, their movements stiff, their expressions desperate. It's one of the most authentic sequences in the film, not because of great acting, but because Walsh refused to stop filming until hypothermia forced his hand. Number 12. Tyrone Power Sr., father of the future Hollywood legend, played a small but crucial role in The Big Trail. He was a seasoned stage actor with decades of experience, brought in to add gravitas to the cast. But by the time filming started, he was already dying. Power was battling a heart condition that left him weak and exhausted. Some days, he could barely stand. The high altitude made it worse. He'd film a scene, then collapse in his tent, gasping for air. The crew whispered about replacing him, but Walsh refused. He respected Power's professionalism, his commitment to finishing what he started. So Power kept working. He delivered his lines with strength and dignity, never letting the camera see his pain. But between takes, his hands shook. His skin turned gray. Everyone knew he was fading. Just months after filming wrapped, Tyrone Power Sr. died. He never saw the finished film, never knew it would flop, never got to witness his son become one of Hollywood's biggest stars. The Big Trail was his final performance, a testament to an actor who gave everything until there was nothing left to give. Number 13. The Buffalo Stampede almost ended production. Walsh wanted a massive sequence showing a herd of buffalo charging past the wagon train, a moment of raw power and danger. So, the crew hired local ranchers who owned a private herd and set up the shot on an open plain. The plan was simple: release the buffalo, let them run, capture it on film. What could go wrong? Everything. The moment the buffalo were released, they didn't run in the planned direction. They scattered. Some charged toward the cameras. Others headed straight for the crew. People dove behind wagons. Cameramen abandoned their equipment and ran. One buffalo slammed into a camera rig, destroying it completely. Another nearly trampled an assistant director who'd frozen in fear. The chaos lasted less than 2 minutes, but it felt like forever. When the dust settled, the crew counted their losses. Thousands of dollars in damaged equipment, multiple injuries, mostly scrapes and bruises, and zero usable footage. Walsh was furious. They spent another week wrangling the buffalo, building stronger barriers, repositioning cameras at safer distances. The second attempt worked better, though the buffalo still refused to cooperate fully. What you see in the film is a compromise. Impressive, but not the spectacular stampede Walsh had envisioned. Another reminder that nature doesn't follow scripts. Number 14. The studio didn't just lose money on The Big Trail, they lost faith in widescreen entirely. After the film bombed, Fox executives declared the 70mm grandeur format a failed experiment. They scrapped plans for future widescreen productions, dismantled the expensive equipment, and returned to standard filming. The few theaters that had installed 70mm projectors ripped them out and went back to 35mm. It would be over 20 years before Hollywood tried widescreen again, with Cinerama and CinemaScope in the 1950s. The Big Trail proved the technology worked, but it also proved audiences weren't ready to pay for it during a depression. Raoul Walsh spent the rest of his career knowing he'd been right about widescreen's potential, but wrong about its timing. In interviews, he'd talk about the 70mm version with pride and regret. He'd seen the future of cinema, filmed it, and watched the industry bury it for 2 decades. By the time widescreen finally became the standard, Walsh was older, tired, making smaller films. The Big Trail was his masterpiece and his curse, a movie so ahead of its time that it destroyed everything it touched, including its own format. Number 15. John Wayne didn't work in Hollywood for nearly a decade after The Big Trail flopped. The studio blamed him for the failure. Critics called him wooden. Directors didn't want to take a chance on the actor who'd killed a $2 million movie. So, Wayne disappeared. He took whatever work he could find, mostly low-budget B-westerns shot in days rather than months, playing forgettable cowboys in forgettable films. He made dozens of them, churning out cheap entertainment for tiny paychecks. His name appeared far down the credits. Sometimes it didn't appear at all. He'd gone from leading man to nobody faster than any actor in Hollywood history, but Wayne didn't quit. He kept working, kept learning, kept improving. Every B-Western was practice. Every bad script taught him something. He studied other actors, watched how they moved, how they spoke, how they owned the screen. Slowly, painfully, he became the actor Raoul Walsh had seen in that first audition. And in 1939, nearly 10 years after The Big Trail destroyed his career, John Ford cast him in Stagecoach. This time, Wayne was ready. This time, he knew what he was doing. And this time, the world finally saw what Walsh had seen all along. The Big Trail didn't make John Wayne a star. It made him earn it. Number 16. The foreign language versions of The Big Trail vanished. After the film bombed in English, Fox never properly distributed the French, German, and Spanish versions. Some prints were shipped overseas, shown in a handful of theaters, then forgotten. Others were stored in vaults, left to decay. By the 1950s, most of these alternate versions were considered lost, destroyed by time and neglect. Film historians spent decades searching for surviving prints. In the 1980s, a partial French version was discovered in an archive in Paris, badly damaged but watchable. A few reels of the German version turned up in Berlin. The Spanish version remains mostly lost. What's fascinating is how different they are. The French actors played scenes with more romance. The German cast leaned into melodrama. Same story, same locations, completely different emotional tones. It's like looking at parallel universes, 4 different Big Trails existing simultaneously, each one reflecting the culture of its intended audience. But most people will never see them. The English version is the only one readily available. The others exist as fragments, footnotes, ghosts of an ambitious experiment that refused to stay in one language or one format. The Big Trail wasn't content to fail once. It failed in 4 languages. Number 17. Raoul Walsh broke his back during production. Not metaphorically, actually broke it. During a particularly dangerous stunt sequence, Walsh was standing too close to a wagon that lost control on a steep descent. The wagon swerved, clipped him, and sent him flying into rocks. He lay there for several minutes, unable to move, crew members rushing to help. A doctor traveling with the production examined him and confirmed a fractured vertebra. Walsh needed immediate hospitalization, but the nearest hospital was 2 days away by horse and wagon. So, Walsh made a choice. He stayed. The doctor splinted his back as best he could, gave him painkillers, and told him not to move. Walsh ignored the advice completely. He directed the rest of the film from a chair, sometimes lying down between takes when the pain became unbearable. He refused to tell the studio what happened because he knew they'd shut down production and replace him. So, he suffered in silence, barking orders through gritted teeth, never showing weakness. By the time filming wrapped, his back had partially healed, though it would cause him pain for the rest of his life. When executives finally learned what happened, they were horrified. Walsh just shrugged and said, "We got the movie done, didn't we?" That's the kind of director he was, willing to break himself for the shot. Number 18. The film's failure ended careers beyond just John Wayne's. Marguerite Churchill struggled to find work after The Big Trail. Studios saw her as part of a disaster and wouldn't take the risk. She made a few more films, all forgettable, then retired from acting entirely in her 30s. Raoul Walsh's reputation took a hit. He'd gone over budget, over schedule, and delivered a massive flop. It took years before studios trusted him with big projects again. Even the cinematographers and crew members found themselves associated with failure. Hollywood has a long memory for expensive mistakes. For everyone involved, The Big Trail became a stain, something to downplay in interviews, omit from resumes, pretend didn't happen. Only decades later, when film historians reassessed the movie, did opinions change. Critics realized The Big Trail wasn't a bad film. It was a masterpiece released at the worst possible time. The technical innovations were groundbreaking. The scope was unprecedented. The ambition was admirable. But in 1930, none of that mattered. The movie lost money, and in Hollywood, that's the only metric that counts. Careers ended not because the film was bad, but because it was expensive. That's the cruelest fact of all. Number 19. The Big Trail's 70mm prints were nearly destroyed forever. After the film flopped, Fox stored the massive film reels in a warehouse and forgot about them. For decades, they sat in deteriorating conditions, the film stock slowly decaying, the images fading. By the 1980s, when film preservationists finally located them, the reels were in terrible shape. Sections had completely dissolved, others were covered in mold. The colors had shifted, though the film was black and white. So chemical deterioration created strange tints and artifacts. A restoration project began, painstakingly scanning and repairing what remained. They couldn't save everything. Some scenes exist only in the 35mm version now, but enough survived to show what audiences in 1930 had missed: the breathtaking scope and clarity of true widescreen cinema. When the restored 70mm version finally screened again in 2012, critics were stunned. This wasn't just a historical curiosity, it was a genuine epic that looked more impressive than most modern films. The irony is perfect. The format that killed The Big Trail in 1930 is what makes it worth watching today. Widescreen eventually won. It just took 80 years and a lot of careful restoration to prove Walsh was right all along. Number 20. Despite everything, despite the failures, the injuries, the bankrupted careers, and the decades of obscurity, The Big Trail changed cinema. It proved that location shooting could work on an epic scale. It demonstrated that widescreen wasn't just a gimmick, but a legitimate artistic choice. It showed that Westerns could be more than cheap shoot-'em-ups, that they could be ambitious, sprawling, visually stunning. Directors like John Ford and Howard Hawks studied The Big Trail, learning from both its successes and failures. When they made their own Westerns in the decades that followed, they borrowed Walsh's techniques, his commitment to authenticity, his willingness to take risks. And John Wayne, the failed leading man who spent 10 years in B-movie purgatory, eventually became the biggest Western star in history, appearing in films that owed everything to The Big Trail's pioneering spirit. The movie was a commercial disaster, but it won the long game. Today it's recognized as a landmark, a turning point, proof that failure and innovation aren't opposites. Sometimes they're the same thing, just viewed from different distances. The Big Trail didn't succeed in 1930, but it succeeded in history. And that might be the weirdest fact of all. Bonus fact. The wagons used in The Big Trail weren't props. They were authentic 19th century covered wagons, purchased from private collectors and Western museums. Some had actually crossed the frontier decades earlier, carried real pioneers, survived real hardships. Raoul Walsh insisted on using them instead of studio-built replicas because he wanted that worn, weathered look that you can't fake. But these antiques weren't meant for the abuse Walsh had planned. By the end of filming, nearly every wagon was destroyed. Wheels shattered during the cliff descent. Axles broke crossing rivers. Frames splintered in the snow. What survived was barely functional. After production wrapped, Fox tried returning them to the museums, but the museums rejected them. They were too damaged, too far gone. So, the studio sold them for scrap wood. Pieces of genuine history, priceless artifacts, ended up as firewood and lumber because Raoul Walsh needed authenticity. Those wagons had survived the actual pioneer era, but they couldn't survive Hollywood. The big trail was too big, too bold, too soon. It bankrupted a studio, killed careers, and disappeared for decades. But it dared to be different when different meant disaster. If you love diving into the chaos behind this forgotten epic, go ahead and like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments what other lost classics we should uncover. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the biggest trails lead nowhere, but the journey still matters.